Hello everyone, warm greetings from Melbourne, Australia. My name is Cheah, and thanks for joining me today on this online platform as we talk about building resilient families with a focus on equipping parents. I'm a child and adolescent psychiatrist working in Melbourne, Australia, and for those who don't know, that means I'm a medical doctor who's trained in psychiatry, dealing with issues relating to the brain and the mind, dealing with people's thoughts, feelings and emotions, and a whole range of different problems in that area. But I then subspecialized working with children and young people. So I work and lead a team of 70 clinicians, and we help children aged 0 to 25 working together with their families and with their schools to help them with a whole range of different kind of mental health problems such as anxiety and depression. Apart from my professional background working as a psychiatrist, I have been able to take this skill into a whole range of different spaces like this. I've done a number of talks over the past few years around a few different churches in Malaysia, in different cities in Australia, and as well as in New York. And the talks really have been focused on helping and equipping people to understand more about mental health issues, to reduce the fear and stigma through promoting this understanding, to encourage people to get help, but also to talk about a whole range of different type of ideas that we can all put in place in terms of promoting better mental health. So today's talk is really about building resilience in families with a focus on all you guys as parents, but I imagine there'll be other people joining this talk who may not be parents. Hopefully some of these ideas will be helpful to all of us as we spend the next half an hour, 40 minutes together. This is not equipped to train you to be a professional, to replace some kind of degree within the next half an hour, but this is about universal interventions. What I mean by that is ideas or tips or strategies that all of us can put in place. So I hope that apart from listening to this talk, as we talk through this, that you are able to think about some ideas about how you can put some things into practice into your day-to-day life, about how you can apply this in your family to be able to help your children, but also particularly yourselves and your whole family as well. So I hope that this will be practical and very helpful, but also a bit thought-provoking as well. To give you a bit more background, I was born in Malaysia. I was actually born in Penang, but I grew up in KL and went to school there. But I spent a lot of my holidays in Penang and visiting all my aunties and uncles and grandparents back then. And I'm very familiar with Penang, including all the good place to eat and the best place for food and so forth. But I actually joined Penang Christian Center youth group when I was in high school, when I was visiting my cousin back then. And this was back in the days before you moved into your current building. It was in the building in opposite Maybank and on Cantonment Road. And I remember joining ISCA, and we were jumping up and down, and the floor was sort of shaking from all the excitement from the Pentecostal youth. So I remember those days very fondly, as well as some of the youth leaders back then. So I'm glad I'm able to join you now and bring back some of my ideas. I'll cover some things apart from my professional background in terms of thinking about how we as Christians approach this area in mental health. So hopefully this will be helpful to all of us. We know from the World Health Organization that 1 in 4 people around the world struggle with a mental health condition in their lifetime. And currently, there would be about 450 million people around the world that would be struggling with a mental health condition and problem. That's a lot of people, and in actual fact, 2/3 of people don't get help for their mental health difficulties and troubles. And the main reasons are these. Firstly, people may not be able to afford it, they can't find the help that they might need, and that becomes a big barrier in terms of getting the professional help they might need in their mental health space. But the second, and actually a very big part of this, is the area of stigma and fear. A lot of people who struggle with mental health conditions are afraid of getting help because they worry that other people may not understand them. Sometimes they don't even understand what they're going through. Their family members may not be understanding what they're going through. They worry about judgment and shame, and that can be a huge barrier in terms of people getting help. In addition to that, so that's what we call stigma, in terms of that fear of judgment around mental health. In addition to that, there may not be many people doing work in this field because of that similar shame and stigma, but fortunately, over the course of time, more and more people are speaking up around their mental health challenges. There are more and more people devoting their careers in being able to help people in this area. So I'm really pleased to see the emerging interest in mental health and being able to have more resources to meet the needs of the people in our community. Today, though, it's really about thinking about, in spite of this fear, the stigma, and the lack of resources and some of these real-world challenges, how do we as a community think about mental health more broadly in terms of the things all of us can put in place? And this is the area of resilience. And resilience really is about thinking about how we can put things in place to prevent the emergence of mental health problems, but also to think about, if you're struggling with a mental health problem, how do we actually reduce the impact of that on our lives? Today's focus is really on equipping you guys as parents about the foundations that you build in your families, but also practical tips that you can use for yourself as an individual, but also tips that you can also help your teenager or your child with, in terms of being able to help them with their mental health condition and difficulty. Mental health problems really are easily defined as things that affect your thinking, your behavior, and your feelings, and this effect is enduring to the point where it might affect your sleep, your appetite, and even your ability to function, being able to work or study, or be able to relate to other people. So it's different from just having a bad day or a bad moment, going through a particular situation, but often the impact or the consequences of mental health problems are actually quite enduring and goes on for quite some time, and it can be quite detrimental to someone's health. In fact, the reason I got into this space talking about mental health like this is because one of my friends who is a pastor, a youth pastor, reached out to me due to a number of young people who unfortunately died from suicide, and we started to engage the church members in terms of doing talks like this, improving people's understanding, to reduce the fear, and to actually, more importantly, actually equip people with basic things that all of us can put in place to promote better mental health for ourselves and for the people around us. So I'm hoping that this will be a good resource for you as parents, and as for all of us as within our community and as a family. Before I get into the details of equipping you guys as parents, I just really want to go through some fundamental basics apart from explaining the stats in mental health. And this is an area about thinking about how we as Christians might approach this space. I often get this question: how do you bring your faith as a psychiatrist together? How does that work? And how do you deal with the spiritual versus the emotional and physical space? My simple answer to this is really thinking about mental health being quite similar to our physical health. That physical and mental health fall within a continuum, and that from a Christian perspective, we see that all these aspects of problems with physical and mental health issues are related to the fallen nature of mankind and the broken world that we live in as a result of the original sin. I see that mental health issues being emotional and spiritual together, that they are not mutually exclusive somehow, that in fact all forms of suffering have a spiritual underpinning or explanation in the background, which relates to the fundamental brokenness of the world that we live in. So I really want to encourage us to try and move away from things that might stigmatize or cause more fear, such as thinking that somehow someone deserves the suffering that they're in, that they're cursed, or that somehow they've brought this upon themselves. And while yes, sometimes when we make poor decisions or decisions that are unwise, it can have poor consequences on our mental health, but it's really important for us to see this more broadly, more universally, rather than just seeing this as individual problems. I'm going to read through some scripture to give us some context about this. So I'm referring to Genesis chapter 3 verses 6 and 7. I'm reading from the New King James Version. Genesis chapter 3 verse 6. So when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, that it was pleasant to the eyes, and a tree desirable to make one wise, she took of its fruit and ate. She also gave to her husband with her, and he ate. Verse 7. Then the eyes of both of them were open, and they knew they were naked, and they sewed fig leaves together and made themselves coverings. So why have I brought these two verses to us? This is a very common passage that we all would have read about. The two things I want to focus on is actually about the fig leaves and the nakedness and shame and covering. All of us throughout our life have a lot of things that we are blessed with our achievements, with our possessions, with the relationships that we have, the people around us. And all these things are things that God has blessed us with. It's a bit like the fig leaves. And at some level, a lot of these things that we own or that we have around us serve a fundamental purpose of actually protecting us or informing our identity. When we have a huge focus about those external things in our lives, they can be like the fig leaves. They form a purpose of covering our underlying shame due to our nakedness. And so through the ups and downs of life, these fig leaves might fall. So through things like losses and grief and changes, we might experience things like relationship troubles. Someone might lose a job, lose a loved one due to illness or sickness or death, or go through significant hardship and struggles. And like these fig leaves, when they fall off, the things that we own, the things that hold us together, they can expose us to an overwhelming sense of shame and fear and nakedness. And these are the points in which mental health problems tend to arise as a result of this overwhelming sense of shame and fear. And it's really important for us to understand this in terms of having a balanced perspective about how we manage and steward the things around us, but also equally having a sense of renewed hope because of what Jesus Christ has done on the cross for us. I'm going to read a different passage which will help us to be able to shift our focus to a space of hope. I'm reading from Romans chapter 8 verses 35 and then verses 38 to 39. Romans chapter 8 verses 35. Who shall separate us from the love of Christ? Shall tribulation or distress or persecution or famine or nakedness or peril or sword? Verses 38 and 39. For I am persuaded that neither death nor life, nor angels, nor principalities, nor powers, nor things present, nor things to come, nor death, nor height, nor depth, nor any other created thing shall be able to separate us from the love of God which is in Christ Jesus our Lord. This is a really encouraging verse because it reminds us of what Christ did on the cross, where he hung and died for our he took on our nakedness and shame through his death, and through his resurrection, and through the power of his Holy Spirit, what this verse is reminding us is that even the nakedness and shame shall not separate us from the love of God. So even when the fig leaves fall, when we go through the ups and downs of life, let us be encouraged that none of these things will leave us in a place where we will feel so exposed and feel naked, and even in those situations that this does not separate us from the love of God. So I really want to encourage us with that before we go into some of the practical, technical discussions around our mental health. One of the really important things I want to emphasize as part of what we call a universal intervention, a universal prevention, is the idea of resilience. Resilience refers to our ability to bounce back from the adversities and challenges in life and to be able to adapt to change with optimism and hope. Now, all of us hope that we naturally want to avoid troubles and difficulties, but unfortunately, that's not the reality of life. All of us go through ups and downs in life and through those challenges. And throughout those challenges, we learn to accept them and we learn to bounce back rather than just seeing those challenges as evidence of some kind of failure. Now, it's really important that we learn to bounce back and to pick ourselves up through the help of others as well, but more importantly, to actually be able to position ourselves in approaching or embracing these seasons of challenges with optimism and hope, knowing that these are seasons that will come and go and pass, and that there's so much that we might be able to learn from this particular season to help us to move on to the next season. And so resilience really is about the ability to cope and adapt rather than the absence of problems. In fact, if you don't seem to have problems in your life, well, first of all, I wouldn't believe that, but also I would be kind of questioning as to actually whether someone is resilient if they don't have problems in their life. In fact, all of us have challenges and difficulties, and that we find different ways to try and cope and adapt to that. Taking us back to why we're here, to talk about raising resilient families and particularly equipping all of you as parents. It's really important that we think about resilience and try to encourage all of us to impart this within our families really from a young age. Although it's really important to know that it's never too late to learn. It's important to promote positive mental health through learning resilience in young children and throughout our lives. One of the key principles in being able to promote resilience is this: to remember that children learn more from what they observe than what they're actually told. So it's really important to pay attention to how you as parents might demonstrate or model your behavior, your communication, and how you manage stress and how you deal with conflict and how you manage a whole range of different things, and through what you show rather than what you tell your children to do. So that's the first thing to kind of keep in mind in terms of the importance of promoting that through what children might observe and being able to pay attention and to what they might be noticing in that space. The next thing to emphasize really is the importance for children, especially young children, that they need a sense of security, safety, and consistency. When children feel safe and secure and have this consistency around them, it allows them to have the confidence to be able to take risks and learn and explore the world around them. And through the challenges of exploring the world around them, they will then come back to a place of security to feel nourished and to be refueled to then do it again. And it's through this pattern of moving from security to exploration back to security that children learn to thrive and develop. And this is what we as professionals might call attachment theory. And basically, the more secure place that the children are in, the more they are able to actually explore the world around them. And obviously different children are different, they have different temperaments and different styles of learning, but this is a general principle that applies to all human beings, so no one's excluded from this whatsoever. It's just about trying to understand what that security might mean for different children at different stages. And being able to build this as a strong foundations would then allow better resilience later in life in terms of dealing with a whole range of different challenges that might be around them. For example, it's really important to know what kind of problems you need to solve for your children and which kind of problems you need to encourage them to learn, to develop and solve for themselves. Similarly, for teenagers as part of developing and growing up, learn to explore and experiment with different things, relationships, values, opportunities, and through that they might actually make mistakes and hopefully be able to learn from them. But if they know that there's a secure relationship they can go back to, which is in their family, then it promotes better opportunities for them to be able to manage those risk-taking behaviors in healthier ways. it's really important to keep in mind that children thrive the best from a combination of this kindness and nurturing, as well as consistent boundaries and structure. Now, it's important to have a good balance of both, not too much of one or too much of the other, and being able to get that balance right at different stages of development. So really encouraging us to think a bit about the mixture of kindness and nurturing, but also the area of kind of having consistent boundaries and structure in the home. And I'm happy to, if there are more questions later on in our Zoom chat time, to be able to look at what that means a little bit more and to explore some of these principles. As parents, you may have access to a whole range of ideas from Google or online platforms, parenting books and tips, and there's so much out there to kind of to give you 8 tips about how to be a better parent, or 6 tips to do this and to do that. It's really important that you use those resources wisely, but not allow those resources to cause more pressure on yourself as a parent. I have a friend who told me that as a parent of a young child, and she was taking her child for checks as part of the usual tracking of development. She felt a bit like it was a performance review to make sure that checking that she was doing the right thing as a parent. And obviously being equipped with good knowledge and good skills is important, but I really want to impart probably the most important point I'm going to actually talk about in this talk today. And yes, that's all these tips and strategies are important, but this one point is going to be probably the most important thing. I think is a game changer, and that's in the area of emotional availability. Emotional availability means this: being able to tune in and understand your own emotions as a person, which then allows you to be able to accurately attune to the emotions of other people. And this includes being able to tune into the emotions of your children, to be able to understand when it might be at. But it comes not from having more strategies and more skills or more knowledge. It comes from a place where you're able to actually be attuned to your own emotions and feelings in the first place, recognizing your fears, your anger, your sadness, and your shame, and all those feelings that you might have as a parent, to be able to know where you're at with that, to be able to acknowledge that, which then allows you space to be able to understand the feelings of your children or your family members. Now, in order to be able to do that, to be emotionally available, it's not about doing more things, going to more courses, or stressing yourself out even more with more tips and ideas. The key thing that helps us all to be emotionally available is, first of all, our self-care. As a parent, you make a lot of sacrifices for your children, for them to have opportunities in education, to have material things, and a whole range of different measures which we kind of count as success in our lives as a family. But sometimes parents might do this at the detriment or cost of their own emotional health and their self-care. Sometimes when I've done these talks and talked about that, I notice parents have tears welling up in their eyes, being quite emotional to think about the idea of looking after them. Sometimes when I've done these talks, parents have tears welling up in their eyes because the idea of thinking about putting themselves first just sounds so foreign, but so important to be able to think about the things you might do for your own self-care. So some of the things could be like learning to take a break, turning to pause, having a good healthy balance, being able to rest, being able to have a mixture of things we need to do as well as the things we enjoy doing, being able to be connected to other people, being able to be aware of our own feelings and be able to talk through them, sometimes writing it down, being able to say things like, oh, I'm angry, I feel scared, or I feel afraid, and being able to share that with someone that you trust. So if you're a parent here, I really encourage that you make self-care a priority, because the better that you are in terms of looking after yourself, the more emotionally available you're going to be for yourself, and the more emotionally available you're going to be for your family members, including your children. couple of other practical tips that can be quite helpful in terms of things to emphasize or focus on if you're a parent here. It's really important as you raise your kids to be thinking about how you focus on valuing effort, not achievement. We are a very achievement-focused society. Often when someone does something, we say things like "good job," "well done." All those things are good. It's positive things. It's praise. But sometimes it's more important to actually take note of the effort rather than what someone might achieve. So, for example, let's say you have a 4-year-old child who's just started to learn to draw and draws, say, a butterfly. Now, it's probably not the most amazing looking butterfly that someone could draw, but he or she is 4 years old. So rather than just saying, "good job," "well done," or "that looks like a great butterfly," take the effort to think about, have a conversation with your child to explore and imagine. Now tell me more about this, what you've drawn. Tell me about why you've drawn this butterfly. Tell me a bit more about what you did there, and take that interest in the effort. So that's an example of building that foundation as a younger child, but actually this extends to all age groups of children and people later on in life, really being able to focus on the importance of valuing the effort rather than achievement. Because when we focus a lot on achievement and when we don't meet those expectations, it can cause a lot of stress. Now, speaking about expectations, it's really important that as part of normal development, that the expectations slightly exceeds capacity. Because when expectation exceeds capacity, people learn and people grow. But when the expectations is far beyond capacity, that massive gap can sometimes be the source or the cause of a lot of stress. So for example, if you have a child in standard 1 and you give them, standard 2 math, maybe it pushes them to the limits and they get able to learn a little bit more and to grow a little bit more, and that's an expected stage of development. But if you suddenly give a standard 1 student a standard 6 level of math, that's likely to cause a lot of stress and anxiety and worry. So it's really about making sure that we understand people's capacities and being able to match the level of capacity with the expectations to make sure that there is enough expectation to promote learning, but not to be so excessive that it causes a lot of stress or anxiety. And granted, there's so much around our society that imposes a lot of stress and expectations on young people and through schools or through other educational platforms or in other areas as well, through social media. And this increase in expectation or perceived expectation can be very stressful for young people, as well as for you as parents as well, in trying to manage all those expectations. So it's really important to try and manage that by trying to understand what are the expectations, what are the capacities, and how to, as closely as possible, match that together. Another really important part of development and learning is the idea of learning about emotions and managing emotions. And this is the area where we call emotional regulation. So it's ability to be able to tap into and understand the different emotions that we might have, such as sadness, anger, fear, and happiness. And being able to appreciate the different types of emotions by sometimes giving them names and calling them what they are. Like I feel fear, I feel anger, I feel sadness. And being able to recognize that, sometimes even writing it down or talking to someone can be quite helpful. So as a parent, if you are able to practice doing that and demonstrate and model to your children that you manage emotions in a healthy way, you can then expect your children to be able to follow and model those approaches as well. Now sometimes for a lot of young people these days, they're actually experiencing incredible amount of pressure with the different types of expectations and avenues and platforms. And sometimes the increased anxiety comes from actually having a lot of options, far too many options. And sometimes when we have too many options, it can be quite confusing and it can be quite stressful. So it's really important to help manage that in terms of making sure that there is a lot of support in terms of managing the different options and expectations, but giving enough space for that learning to happen and for that decision making to happen. In terms of emotional regulation and emotional learning, it's also really important to be able to model that through perhaps like practicing that. So for example, when we are teaching children emotions, we would usually recommend things like, for example, if someone looks sad, to actually say, oh, hey, you look sad. So give words to what you see and what you observe, and making it quite intentional and quite deliberate, because that's how children learn best in terms of being able to practice and model that. And sometimes it could be fun in terms of turning into a game, because when you turn into a game, people can actually, everyone can take turns and learn to play and to be able to create games that allow us to practice managing emotions. Another area is actually learning to manage conflict. Now, one of the best ways that children learn to manage conflict is actually through their parents. So you might have heard this cliche of saying that it's best if parents are on the same page. I actually disagree. I think that all of us have different views and different opinions, and actually it's okay for a mom and dad to disagree. It's about how do you have appropriate disagreements and be able to resolve that in respectful ways with calm emotions, and then come to an agreement that, in spite of different understanding or different perspectives, you're able to come to some common ground. And it's really important that moms and dads are regularly being able to, where appropriate, demonstrate and show how they do this in front of their children, where it's appropriate. Not everything is appropriate. I'll leave that to your wise judgment, but it's really important to know when to deliberately show that, so that children have an experience of mom and dad working out their differences and different difficulties and come together and be able to do that in a respectful way. So equally, when they've got that experience, they can go into the different challenges that they have in their friendship spaces and peer groups, and being able to manage challenges in relationships when they encounter it. One of the most difficult things for a lot of young people really in the peer space, so issues with their friendship groups, is knowing how to manage conflict in a healthy and assertive way. So I'd encourage you to be promoting that, being quite intentional in using words or other tools like writing things down, to be able to coach and teach young people to manage stress and challenges and difficulties. The other thing is also, it's important for, if you're a parent of a teenager, to work out what your role is in terms of supporting your child in terms of safe exploration, as well as a sense of security and safety. It's important to differentiate what kind of things, when your young person is going through some challenges or difficulties, you need to try and work out. There are times where you do need to help solve the problems, because sometimes they need some practical help with that. But more often than not, they need someone to listen. So someone to hear them out and to understand them, not for someone to take over and solve all the problems for them. So it's really important to have that right balance, knowing when it's appropriate to jump in and solve problems, particularly as your child grows older to a later teenage years or young adult years. It's really important that you keep the channels open through a listening, non-judgmental space. Sometimes, being able to speak your mind when you need to, but more often than not, actually giving space to hearing, listening, and understanding. And sometimes it can be quite difficult to work it out, because unlike, if you've got a very young infant, if they cry, you assume that they're hungry or they're stressed or they're upset. Usually for a teenager, it's much harder to guess. So sometimes it's actually okay to ask, do you want me to solve the problem, or would you want me to just listen? And getting in the habit of practicing how to differentiate those things until you sort of get the feel right in terms of being able to have those channels of communication open. The other thing to promote really is the importance of being able to understand the difference between excellence and perfectionism. So excellence comes from learning from our mistakes and failures, whereas perfectionism works really hard to avoid failure. All throughout life we learn from our failure, and sometimes the more mistakes we make, the more we learn. And so resilience really comes from our ability to bounce back because we've learned from our past mistakes and failures. Sometimes some people take shorter or longer time than others to be able to learn in that space, and so it's about being able to know the right temperament and personalities and the right timing, but also making sure that there is space to support, but also space to give space to learn from failures as well. The other thing is really important that we're able to think about the big picture and focus on certain things. There are a number of things that we all value very importantly in our modern society, and the things that give us security, value and worth, and that's our study and our work. Those things are obviously very important. They are a blessing, they are a gift, there are many good things out of it. It's very important at a very practical level, but to remember that actually being able to prioritize relationships is so much more important in terms of getting that balance right, in terms of the emphasis on achievements, study and on work or whatever that might be. Because at the end of the day, relationships is what's going to get us through the ups and downs in life, more so than our achievements, which may come and go, which may fall off, very much like the fig leaves I mentioned earlier. So I really encourage you to be able to emphasize the importance of emotional availability, self-care, prioritize relationships, and be able to understand the different stages of development in terms of understanding what your child might need from you, whether it's practical help or actually being able to listen. And through that, if we are all able to do one thing that helps to promote our sense of understanding with regards to emotions, you're a step further in terms of being better equipped as parents. So in terms of summing up, I think it's so important that I really acknowledge that there's so much that you have to contend with as a parent these days, so much to think and worry about, but also to trust the importance of the fundamental things you've built in your family. Structure regular family time, structure healthy routines with your family, promote emotions, model positive behavior, focus more on what you say and more with what you do rather than actually what you tell someone to do. So really trying to think about all these aspects that can be quite helpful in terms of building resilience within your family, but also equipping you as parents to promote the best environment that is possible for your young person to be able to manage the ups and downs in life, and hopefully they'll be able to learn from what you've been able to show them and support them. And even if you haven't been doing this, it's never too late to put new ideas in place. All of us are always learning to find different ways that we can manage differently in this space. So I really encourage you to be able to keep the channels open and trying to promote that sense of emotional availability, and again, most importantly, for you to be able to look after yourself and your self-care first, to then be able to look after other people. I hope this has been helpful. We've covered a lot of different things very quickly, so I didn't get a chance to actually go through a lot of the details and the application. I hope that I'm able to answer some of your questions that may be coming up through the Zoom chat that we have after this talk. Hope you have signed up and you're joining in so that we can actually talk through some practical applications a little bit further. Thank you so much for your time, and look forward to chatting further.